Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 13th Web Talk of 2021. I hope you all had a relaxing and somewhat quiet 4th of July weekend. And mostly, I hope you were able to recharge a bit and spend a little bit of time with your loved ones and friends. And it is just great to have you here as we move into these summer months. I know that you all continue to remain busy, so we here at CADS and ALE and Web Talk, we are not taking a summer break, and we're going to continue to be here for you. So again, thanks for joining us. We have a little over 360 people joining us today, 260 people joining us today from across the state, as always, including some of our partners from the California Department of Aging and some of our managed care partners and other allies. So thanks for hanging in here through these last 16 months with us. It's really been a remarkable journey we've all been on together. And I think you know by now, I'm Lydia Missilidis, the Executive Director for the Alliance for Leadership in Education, and your host. These web talks are made possible for you all, the Adult Day Services community, from a generous grant to us by the Archstone Foundation. And that will take us through September with these web talks. And I don't know yet what's going to happen after that, so more to come. Next slide, please. And these are our tips that you're familiar with. As always, we are recording this webinar. It will be available on the CADS website tomorrow. We're listen-only format today. You should check your email, and from Pam, there will be an attachment with this PowerPoint presentation, and you can also download it from the control panel to the right of your screen. We do encourage you to submit questions, comments, your thoughts in the question box. We have Diane Puckett and Lena Haratunian assisting today behind the scenes to help us with questions and any other technical issues that may arise. And we always read every single comment that comes in on our survey, so please do take 5 seconds to complete that survey at the end and share your thoughts and your feedback. That really helps us with these webinars. So next slide, please. The last web talk topic a couple of weeks ago was a lively discussion. Our title was California Has Reopened. What does it mean for Adult Day Services? It was June 15th, the day after the grand reopening. And you'll see from some of the comments here that I included, there was a bit of disappointment about not having new state guidance and not enough information specific to Adult Day programs, and I must agree. I was also disappointed. That wasn't by design. We had really hoped, anticipated that there would be guidance available to share with you that day, at least preliminarily, for both Adult Day programs and Adult Day Health, but that was not to happen. So with the clock ticking for Adult Day healthcare centers to advance their recongregation activities, we really needed to take that time to refresh everyone about how to think about regathering at the centers. And I hope some of you who are Adult Day programs did find some benefit from that conversation. Next slide. So I continue to be disappointed to report today that there is still no new specific guidance from either the Department of Social Services for Adult Day programs or the Department of Public Health for our Adult Day healthcare centers. And believe me, I've continued to ask and make suggestions as to what we'd like to see. I do promise that as soon as we get guidance from the state, we will announce a webinar. And I don't know yet if it will be in addition to a state webinar or if we'll be able to do something, but believe me, I'm just as anxious as you all are to get some specific guidance. Meantime, you do need to follow the rules applicable to residential and healthcare, distancing, masking, checking temps on entry, and so on. You guys all know what those are. I know it's really frustrating, and I worry that the spread of the Delta variant is causing the state to delay and rethink its guidance. So that's all I can imagine right now might be holding things up. I also wanted to let you know on this slide that CADS is tracking and analyzing the state budget that was just passed and signed into law, and There's more to come. That is not the end of this state budget process. Seems to be an annual ongoing refinement of the July budget. But I can say that it's going to be exciting to share with y'all these incredible new investments in home and community-based services that are in this budget. So there's going to be more to come soon. And next slide. I just want to stress that, as I mentioned with the Delta variant, it is so important to continue your work to support access to vaccinations for your participants and staff. I know many of you have achieved great success, but with this Delta variant having become now the dominant strain in California circulating in our communities, there really is more urgency to protect your participants, staff, families, loved ones by getting these highly effective, any one of these highly effective vaccines. So because this Delta variant is highly transmissible, we are hearing the state is reporting an uptick in hospitalizations, and they are almost exclusively people who have not yet been vaccinated and protected from severe disease. So getting those vaccination numbers up is the key to recovery, and it's going to help us make the case to the state for liberalizing in-center and transportation distancing, which I know you all hope for. But I just worry that is not going to happen if we cannot show our vaccination rates are really high. So thank you for doing your best as always, and let me know in the QA box or in the survey if there's anything that you need help with in regards to vaccination education. We'll be happy to give you some help on that. So next slide. So finally, I am very excited to introduce or reintroduce you to Susie Gruber, our featured presenter today. Some of you may have already attended a class that Susie has provided at a prior CADS conference over the years, or maybe you were present for last summer's CADS webinar where Susie met with us early in the pandemic. As a friend of CADS and ALE and all of you, Susie really gets what you do, and she has a really good idea of what's been going on these past 16 months. So we're thrilled to have Susie back with us. She tells her own story best about how she came to her passion for helping others be the best they can be. So I'm going to leave that to Susie to share. I just want to say that we both, Susie and I both, hope that you will use the trauma framework that she's going to share with you again today as a lens through which you can better understand your own response to this experience of the past 16 months. And by doing so, gain insight on how to better help your participants and families emerge from this disaster with a newfound appreciation for how much we truly need to give ourselves the space and time to support each other through this phase of slowly re-engaging and gathering back at the centers. So thank you, Susie, for sharing your many years of training, insight, and experience with us. I am so happy to turn the rest of this presentation over to you now. Welcome.
Thank you, Lydia. It's so great to be back with all of you today. Such a pleasure to be able to support you all. And as Lydia said, I have so much gratitude and compassion for what everyone is doing to support our elders and support their reconnection and their well-being in this time of great change and you know, shifting experiences. So we titled the talk, "How Are You Really?" And that's really what I'm interested in supporting you in today as we come together, is how are you really in all of this? I know we've all been running a million miles an hour and doing the best we can to stay above water. And this is a time for us to come together and consider that question, both personally and professionally. And so in this conversation throughout, I've got three kind of categories here, but they're kind of all mushed together. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, what makes it different than other types of trauma. I'm going to talk about how to come back into balance, and I'm going to talk about how you can support your teams and the elders that you support. So again, as I emphasize resilience and self-care, I want to remind you, and I know many of you heard this from me before, as we're coming together, please take care of yourself during this conversation. If you need to get up, walk around, stretch, turn off your camera, or remove yourself from the webinar for a minute just because things feel like they're too much, like whatever you need to do to attend to yourself and take care of yourself, I really, really encourage you to do that. So as part of that, I want to just take a moment for us to arrive together. So just, if it's okay for you, just feel the weight of your feet on the floor. Maybe you're standing, maybe you're seated. And then just take a moment to feel the weight of your body if you're sitting where you're sitting. You might be sitting in a chair. If you're like me, sometimes I sit on the floor when I'm doing stuff like this. And then take your hand and put it at the back of your neck, just kind of right where there's like two bony protrusions at the base of your neck. Just put a hand back there and notice how that is for you. I just noticed for myself as I do this, I'm slowing down a little bit as we come back together. And then just take your hands and place a hand on top of each knee. Just noticing how that is, getting the pressure and the position just right for you. Notice if your breathing changes while you're doing this. And then move your hands to your hip bones if that feels okay for you. Again, getting the hand position just the way that feels right for you. Notice my breath deepen as I do this with you all. And then place a hand on each elbow. And just really notice what changes inside you as you take the time to connect with yourself in this way. This is a way of feeling your own structure, of feeling your own place in the world in the midst of all of this change. And then when you're ready, you can let that go. And we'll jump into a little more content here. And I'm going to weave these little direct experiences in a few different places throughout in our time together today. So I just want to start with naming that for many of us, what's been going on over the last 15, 18 months has just been a lot. And when things are too much, when it's more than we can tolerate, we often feel anxious, reactive. We might feel helpless, like there's nothing we can do. Sometimes we feel trapped and stuck. We can even get really scared and panicky, or we can feel like things are hopeless and literally not want to go out of the house or not want to get out of bed. And I just want to normalize all of these reactions. Some people get more emotional. They might find themselves crying a lot. They might find themselves getting angry at the drop of a hat. You know, when you're on hold with somebody on the phone, for example, you might notice having a short fuse with them, even though you've never met this person. I just want to really normalize that all of that is to be expected based on what we're all experiencing. So I just want to do a little bit of biology, and I know many of you have seen this before in presentations I've given here. When we feel threatened, there's a basic biological response that happens, and it happens really quickly and unconsciously. The first thing that happens if it's a discrete event, like we hear a sound or we see something out of the corner of our eye, is we try to orient to the source of the threat. And by doing that, we're already assessing, okay, is there a real danger here? If it's a person, sometimes we'll engage with that person and try to talk our way into safety. So for example, I've had that happen where I've talked my way out of a traffic ticket. And if we realize that it's a threat that we can't talk our way out of and something that we definitely need to respond to, then we might start to fight or we might run away. And I just want to name that, if a bear is chasing us, the running looks very physical, but sometimes running away can look like, just disengaging from, not wanting to be part of. Sometimes fighting can look like doing a lot, like really trying to will yourself through the experience. And all three of those first ones, there's this basic underlying orientation of I can survive this. It gets trickier when we get into more severe threat and there's this sense of feeling frozen, like I don't really know if I can survive this. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. And it's that kind of place of suspended animation. Fold is that place of despair, collapse, hopelessness. It's a sense of I can't survive this no matter what. And that's a very tricky place. All of these states are meant to be short-term rather than chronic, but for many of us, especially depending on our personal histories, we live in some chronic form of this. And that takes a huge toll on us. So specifically with the pandemic, even if we were feeling relatively energized and resilient when all of this started, this has been going on for a long time now. It's really important to acknowledge that and to acknowledge our own need for recovery. And that can be tricky because while we're in a different phase of the crisis now, which I'm going to get to in a moment or two here, there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and that feels really important for me to acknowledge. So one of the things I want to just name is that the amygdala is the lizard part of our brain, and it's the part that's constantly hypervigilant, signaling threat. Ideally, we're relaxed and alert, but if we're in a chronically threatened state, this balance that you see here gets out of whack so that the amygdala carries more weight than our cortex, and we literally stop thinking clearly. So if at any point during this pandemic you've had the experience of like, oh my God, I can't put two thoughts together, or I literally don't have the bandwidth to figure out what to do or how to respond, chances are your threat response may be dominating. And it's always helpful when we can notice that and then start to take some self-care actions that will help us restore a little more balance. So Lydia's going to put up a poll now. I'm curious what your current stress level is. Like, just take a moment and consider on a scale of, I think it was 1 to 5, just what your current level of stress is given everything that's going on. And also consider any questions that have come up for you as you're answering the poll and just reflecting on the arriving exercise and this little bit of information about the human threat response.
So Susie, I don't think that you can see the responses as they're coming in.
No, I don't think I can. Let's see. Oh, here we go. I just found it.
Oh, good. Yeah, so you can see the stress levels
Yep.
fairly high. More than half people are feeling moderately to very high. So I'm going to give
Yeah.
it just another few seconds here and close the poll. So if you did want to respond, if this is your opportunity to do so, and I'm going to close the poll right now. And I'll share the results.
Let's see.
So there you go.
Let's see. Let me get back to sharing my screen here. Did that work,
There you
Lydia?
go. Yeah, you've got the Cortex
Okay.
slide back up.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for sharing. I really want to acknowledge that many of you are experiencing significant stress as you move through all of this. And my hope is that some of the information that I share with you today will help you navigate that stress with a little bit more ease and balance. I just want to see if anyone has any questions at this point. I don't see any right now, but maybe there are.
Yeah, let's just give a moment to see if a thought has emerged from anyone that they'd like to add here. Okay. Let's move on, Susie. Thank you.
Sounds good, thank you. So what makes this event different from other disasters or shock traumas like a car accident or a fall? This COVID pandemic was a sudden, unprecedented long-term change. So it came on pretty suddenly and it affected the entire world. So absolutely everyone has been impacted by this in some way. And although we know a lot more now than we did, say last April, May, June, we're still in it. We don't know the duration of this or the exact resolution. And certainly we're all hoping that we can come back together and resume family gatherings and the centers can be fully open in person, et cetera. But we don't know when that's going to happen. And that uncertainty can be really, really stressful. The virus itself is a new virus that is truly life-threatening. And so there's a lot of scientific research being done to better understand that. But again, there's still a lot to learn. And the impact on our worldwide economy has been really, really challenging and led to a lot of increased need for people. And that can have an especially big impact on elders whose economic situations are often tenuous at best. And that leads to the medical and social services systems being incredibly taxed as they try to figure out how to respond to an unprecedented event while at the same time seeing more demand for services. So, you know, this really is something that we've all never faced before in our lifetimes, and hopefully we won't ever have to face it again. So I broke the stages of the pandemic down just so we could start to make sense of this from a kind of biological perspective. When the pandemic began, it was literally about just surviving. I mean, so many of us were focused on basic needs like, you know, masks and toilet paper and having enough food in the house when we couldn't go out. How do we go out safely and take care of our basic needs? And then as that initial phase started to shift, we entered the long haul of the pandemic where we could no longer meet with family and friends the way we used to. Our emotional resources were greatly inhibited, and we had to start to get used to a new normal, but it was the new normal that kept changing. So what does it really mean? And now as we shift out of the kind of lockdown shutdown phase, we're in a stage of reconstruction. But there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So the bottom line is we're all being asked to increase our capacity to tolerate change. And it's often at this stage that emotions emerge. For example, what happens when we reconnect with people in person for the first time, there might be this incredible anticipation of coming back together. And then on the other side of it, kind of an emotional crash. And that can be due to a lot of things, but one thing it can be due to is just this basic sense of relief and possibly unprocessed emotion about how it's been to have been separate. I also want to name that for some people, coming back together is not at all comfortable. I know for myself, as someone who tends to be a bit of an introvert, I actually have enjoyed spending time, on my own. And so to begin to do stuff again in person feels uncomfortable for me. So that's, I just want to name that because for some people that's their reality. There's a lot of different realities here. FEMA has a wonderful model for disaster recovery. And, this is meant for things like hurricanes and floods and earthquakes, but I think there's something for us to learn here for ourselves, that the different phases that are presented here, while they might look different, the slopes of the lines and stuff might be different. Each of these elements, in my opinion, is relevant to this experience with the pandemic. So for many of us, there was a coming together at the beginning of it and helping each other out. There was a sense of taking inventory of, okay, where am I? What resources do I have? What resources do I need? And we all are have a need to come to terms with what's going on. And I'm going to get to that process in just a moment here of what that looks like, because that's very different. This reconstruction process is going to take a while because so many of the foundational elements of our society have been affected by this. This is, it really is a new normal rather than going back to the way things were. And hopefully there can be some good that comes out of that. And I want to acknowledge, a feature of this, when I was talking about the threat response, I mentioned this place of orienting to the threat. This experience has been disorienting for all of us. Like literally, we don't know how to find ground and what's solid. We've all experienced loss of some kind. Many of us know loved ones who've been impacted either by getting the disease and still having long-haul COVID symptoms, or we know people who've died. There's just been lots and lots and lots of impact. So I can't underestimate enough this sense of disorientation. And the reason why I'm emphasizing that is that's something we can address inside of ourselves of like, okay, what do I need to feel oriented? Like what feels stable, what feels familiar, and really going towards that, because the shifting and changing in the world is going to keep happening. How do I create a sense of orientation? Like for me personally, it's been watching baseball games. Like there's still baseball, thank goodness. And that's something that I frequently do to help myself stay oriented to something that was true before the pandemic and is still true now. Let's see. I also want to name that, with these stages, both this FEMA model and the stages that I named earlier, each of us has a different speed and rhythm in moving through this. So for example, I might be able to adjust really quickly to the shifting and changing and come very quickly to, okay, this is what I need to do. For other people, it takes a longer time to acknowledge, or they may not even want to acknowledge what's really going on. And I want to really name that can strain relationships big time, both personal and professional relationships. So if one person in the relationship really is clear that there's a threat and wants to do something, and the other person isn't quite up to speed, as it were, that can create a lot of friction and disconnection. There also may be differences in how each person approaches threat. So the strain on relationships, as I see it, has been tremendous during this time, and I want to really normalize that. Here's a wonderful clear expression of what one of us here has experienced during the pandemic. It feels like we've been out to sea trying to avoid shipwreck over the last 15 months of the pandemic. Now the lifting of COVID restrictions and reintegration back to in-center services feels like we are headed out on another voyage with no time or space for restoration, to rest, or to process what we lost. I love this expression because it so succinctly expresses what we're all grappling with, the uncertainty and the disorientation. So Lydia, would you be willing to post the poll, the next poll here? I'm just curious how many of us here together today have lost someone they know to COVID?
So, Susie, I'm going to close the poll here in just a moment. We're almost at 70% voting, and I'm really sad to see these numbers. 63% so far saying yes, and 32 no, and 5% not sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in a moment. So if you haven't voted yet, please do so now.
And I just want to echo what Lydia just said. I feel really sad to see these results as well. I feel teary actually, and I just want to acknowledge the level of loss that that so many of us here have experienced. One of the things that's happened is the pandemic has disrupted our normal rituals around loss. So, you know, yes, it's great that people can do Zoom memorials, and I've participated in a couple of them, but it's not the same as coming together in person and celebrating and grieving the person that we've lost. So I just want to acknowledge what we're all holding here, and that so many of you are holding all of this while still being in service to the people that you serve. And that's a lot. That's a lot. All of us who work in the helping professions have been asked to serve others to a much greater degree, while we're also all going through this ourselves. And that is just a lot to ask of any of us. So yeah. I mentioned a moment ago this place of disorientation. Okay, hang on 1 second. Why am I not?
And Susie, while you're working on that, could I ask you a question from one of our listeners?
Sure.
I think it's relevant maybe before you move into this segment.
Yeah.
For those who avoid negative feelings and focus on doing, as you mentioned earlier, what are some suggestions for, you know, working with a person who uses that as their way of coping?
Yeah, so two thoughts come to mind. One is that, and I'm going to get into this in more detail in a moment, but there's a really positive side to doing. Like, we can get a tremendous amount done. But from my perspective, where my curiosity goes is what's important about not feeling. Like, to get curious about that question. For many people, we're afraid that if we let ourselves feel, we'll be overwhelmed, we won't be able to function, etc. But in my experience, we actually prolong our own disconnection and dysregulation by not letting ourselves feel. And to be fair, there are times when it's not appropriate for us to just stop and grieve. If we're helping, you know, serving a person who's lost a loved one, and we suddenly feel this overwhelming grief that comes up because we've also lost somebody, that might not be the appropriate time to feel it. So being able to just give that a seat next to us to come back to is a really important strategy. And I'm going to get into emotions in more detail in a little bit here. So stay tuned for more on that. And thanks for the question. It's a really important question. So right now I want to offer another self-care exercise that can really support you in reorienting. It turns out that when we move our head and neck, there's a direct connection to our heart, in that when we orient, it actually reduces our heart rate. So I'm going to walk you through a really basic orienting exercise that you can do anywhere at any time. And this is one that you can also do with the folks in your centers. It's super, super simple and doesn't require very much from the participant. So just make yourself comfortable, whatever that means to you right now, however you're seated, standing, whatever you are, and literally let your eyes go wherever they want to in the space that you're in. Just move your head and neck and just let your eyes go wherever they want to. And then let yourself land on something that's pleasing to you. It might be an image of your kids, it might be a plant outside your window, it might be a painting on your wall, it might be the color of your wall, it can be anything. And really look at it and just consider for yourself, what do you like about it? Just ask yourself what it is that you like about what you're looking at. So for example, I'm looking at a little painting and I love, it's a painting of a front door, and I just love what that means to me in terms of the image of coming home. Just notice what happens on the inside as you do that. Like for me, I notice that my shoulders drop a little bit and my breath slows down. And I'm just curious if any of you notice a similar response or something that changes inside you as you do this. So I'm going to move on. So when we get disoriented, when we feel threatened, our survival strategies kick in. Survival strategies are unconscious behaviors and reactions that we have to stress and overwhelm. We often learned these when we were children in whatever environment we grew up in. We use these as our go-to when we feel anxious and reactive, scared, trapped, stuck, hopeless, shut down, all those things that I mentioned earlier. All of these are ways of disconnecting from our internal process, what's really happening inside us, and we tend to lose track of ourselves. And that's a feature of feeling threatened. It's often when something's too much, of course we don't want to feel that. And this goes to the question that somebody asked about negative feelings. Like, we disconnect from experiences that we feel like are too much, and then we resort to survival strategies. And we all have them. Nobody gets out of this one. So here's a few different ways that can look. It can look like the person who isolates. It can look like the person who tries to get everything right, tries to be perfect. I imagine in this group, there's a lot of us who want to take care of everyone else first and put their needs last. There's a lot of people who use denial, who want to believe that everything's going to be fine when, while there may be things that are going fine, there's also a lot of things that needed attending. Also, when we feel threatened and overwhelmed, even though we might need to rest, we discover that we can't say no to anything. So if someone asks you to do to support yet another person, your answer is yes, because you want to end their suffering, and you make these other people matter more in a certain way than your own needs do. And for many of us, we try to control the situation. That's a very common one in an experience like the pandemic, especially when the threat is something so invisible and unpredictable. We want to put things in their place. We want to, make sure that there's as few surprises as possible. I know this is a big one for me. When during the pandemic, I noticed myself want to have everything in my house in its place. Like, okay, I can't control out there, but maybe I can control my environment in here. So just take a moment and notice if you resonate with any of these, or maybe even as I raise this issue of survival strategies, there's other ones that that you become aware of. I just want to acknowledge Amanda's question about your brain doesn't want to stop. And you know, this can be another strategy, is like we feel like we have to stay in motion. I know that's been a big one for me. It's like I have to keep doing something. And what I would say to you is use some of the exercises that I'm providing here, like the orienting exercise, like that arriving exercise I'm going to do in a few minutes. We're going to do an exercise where I invite folks to hold different body parts. And just notice what happens when you start to settle even a little bit. There's this very natural kind of what we call activation and settling cycles that can happen. For some of us, settling feels dangerous. When we start to settle, there's some part of us that thinks it's dangerous to settle. And so when we become aware of that, we can increase our capacity to tolerate the hypervigilance. So we can hold the settling and we can hold the hypervigilance, the need to do at the same time. We can make space for both of those processes inside ourselves. And when we do that, we start to normalize settling, because chances are, for many of us, the idea that settling is unsafe came from another time and place, usually our childhood, our deficient childhood, when it truly was unsafe to settle. For many of us, if we grew up in emotionally or physically dangerous or deficient environments, we learn to protect ourselves by always being on alert. But that kind of young part of us doesn't know that we're not in that now. And unfortunately, the pandemic can mimic that, because danger could, quote, come from anywhere, right? It could come from any person that we're with. We don't know. And so it's important to increase our capacity for settling in spite of the real threat that's going on right now. I also just want to acknowledge, I touched on it a minute or two ago, but there's a lot of positives that can come from these survival strategies. You know, people who focus on perfection can produce incredible art, you know, program development, like whatever they're focused on, they can do an incredibly high level of work. People who take care of other people, God bless them. I mean, it's really such a gift when people who have the capacity to care for others really show up. But what I'm really interested in here is for all of us to start to track, okay, where am I crossing the line? Like, I like to think of it as the 50-50 balance. Like, how much of my attention is on my internal process and my own needs, and how much of it is on the external, what other people want or what I perceive that they need from me. And when there's a threat, many of us get out of balance in that way, and that's when we start to get depleted and exhausted and we lose our resilience, is when that gets out of balance. So when our survival strategies dominate our choices, we literally lose connection with our internal state. We lose connection with what's actually going on. And, you know, as this image shows, like, we give more weight to what other people want from us, or we prioritize them more than ourselves. And so I'm not suggesting that you should stop helping people at all. That's not what I'm saying. My offering here is for you to begin to track your own state, your own what's going on for you, as much as you're tracking other people, and to begin to give both sets of information a place at your table, so that when you decide what to do for yourself, you know, what choices you want to make, what you want to say yes to, that it becomes balanced. And the cool thing about this image here is there's actually an increase in capacity that can happen. We actually can increase our capacity to be with other people when we attune to ourselves as much as others. And that's kind of ironic. But when we do give ourselves a seat at the table, we restore that sense of balance, and we actually can make better choices about what brings us pleasure, what brings us alive. For many of us, it's a true joy to help other people until it gets so out of balance that we're depleted. And that's what we really want to be tracking. Let's see. So I'm using this word attune, and this is really important. Curiosity is key here. In order to recover and restore your resilience, it's important for all of us to give ourselves space to acknowledge how the pandemic has affected us personally and professionally. Really take the time to get curious. For a lot of people, journaling is a great way to do this, or finding a trusted other to just share with. What do you need? What are you feeling? What's your body telling you? I know for me, like I hold a lot of tension in my shoulders and neck and head. And so tuning in with, okay, am I feeling really tense right now? What impulses and thoughts do you notice? So for example, Amanda was saying that her brain doesn't want to stop. So that's an important thing to be curious about, is what's happening inside us when we want to stay in motion. If we weren't moving, if we weren't doing, what would we be experiencing instead? You know, what are we running over or through or beyond? And, you know, given what the poll shared about the number of us that have experienced loss, for many of us, there might be grief there that we haven't recognized. And I'm gonna talk about that in a little bit. The other thing about the 50-50 balance that I want to name is when we tune into ourselves and we get curious about ourselves, it helps us know what's ours and what's another person's. So many of us have a challenge around making other people's emotional states ours. We resonate, we pick up on other people's states, and then all of a sudden we're vibrating in the same way that they are. Like suddenly we're feeling irritated or sad. So when we get good at attuning to what's going on inside ourselves, we're more able to see, okay, what's ours and what's theirs. And it doesn't mean we disconnect from the other person, but how can we stay connected with them while they have their experience and we have our own experience? We don't have to suffer just because other people are suffering. We can still show up and be a source of support without really taking that on. And this is really, really key to preventing secondary trauma. Any questions about any of this? I know I've shared a lot, and for some of us, this 50-50 balance might be a very odd thing if we're really used to putting other people first.
Susie, I don't know where this quite fits in, but you know, our centers are so used to being hands-on and connecting with people on a very personal and, you know, if you want to say sort of intimate level. I mean, our centers get to know their participants so well and have actually expressed to me that they've learned to really appreciate and understand the caregivers in a much deeper way. But yet we can't, it's not safe yet to feel like we can get back to being able to put a hand on someone's shoulder or give them a hug when they arrive or they leave. It still feels threatening, to use your terminology. So I'm wondering, in your experience, are there some ways that we can show that same warmth and connectivity without the physical touch being involved?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I started doing with some of my friends is like, we'll like lift elbows towards each other. Like there's these funny little gestures that aren't quite touching that we've learned to do with each other. Another one that I really like is just putting hands on heart. So like if I have my hands on my chest and inviting the other person to do that, there's some shared experience there. Yes, for some people, this can have, you know, spiritual connotations, even just a slight bow or a dip of the head. But finding some physical movement to acknowledge the presence of the other person can at least begin to create a sense of I see you and you see me, which is, you know, so much of what's been missing.
Yeah, to me too, Susie, that I think eye contact is really important.
Mhm.
So I'd
Yep.
love for the audience to put any of their suggestions or experiences related to this in the question box, and we could share those.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
Yep.
that's good.
Yeah, and I want to name that we want to be considerate of cross-cultural considerations here. Like I know in the Native American community, as much as I love eye contact, for them that's actually disrespectful.
Hmm.
So, you know, normalizing whatever's true for the primary culture that you support is really important. And I like, Lydia, what you just did here of inviting collaboration, asking the participants what would feel good to them. Bringing them into the reconstruction process if there's some way to do that that feels appropriate to the caregivers,
Hmm.
um, as a way of like when somebody feels like they're a part of the change that's happening, and helps them
Hmm.
feel reoriented because they feel like a part of, rather than the pandemic where it feels like something is being done to us, you know?
Yeah, and I'm thinking too, as we get back to center interactions, I'm pretty confident when the guidance comes out, we're going to all still need to be wearing masks when we're in the center. And so you've, sort of eliminated half of the face, right, in terms of
Yeah.
expression. So I think your
Yeah.
point about, being culturally sensitive, our teams are very much so. So I really appreciate you calling that out and thinking of ways. And then Michelle just put in a quick note. She loves the elbow greeting. So yeah, finding our own ways of communicating, whether it's with the eyes or elbow touch or a bow,
Mm-hmm.
some new ways is going to be good. Jill says hugging yourself and letting them know it is a virtual hug for them.
Mm-hmm.
Often they hug themselves and return the gesture. That's really cool.
That's really cool. I like that one too.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jill and
Yeah, and
Michelle.
these bring some lightness to an experience that can be really heavy. Like, the elbow greeting to me is just kind of silly, and I just feel like I need more silly right now.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe a little hip bump in there too.
Yeah,
Okay, very good. Those are the comments that just came in.
awesome. Thank you. So I'm actually just going to read through this one in the interest of time because we've got so much going on. So this is another self-care thing that you can do with your participants. It's literally just putting a hand on the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that runs from the base of the skull all the way into the gut, and it innervates all the major organ systems from the base of the skull into the gut. So lungs, heart, um, digestion, all of that. And so by literally taking your hand and for 30 seconds to a minute, putting it on the base of your skull, your throat, center of chest, belly, I like to do 2 at a time. This is something you can do to support settling and arriving with your folks that can be super resourceful. I do this in the grocery store. It's like if I'm standing in line and I'm feeling stressed, I'll just start doing this. So how do you manage your emotions? Just take a moment now and consider if you're someone who doesn't like to feel them, if you prefer you never had one again, if you don't see the point, if you want to do something instead of letting yourself feel them, or if you're someone who tends to act them out on others. I just want to acknowledge that these are all strategies that many of us developed over time for managing our emotions, particularly if you grew up in a family environment where our emotions were either dismissed or where in some way it was dangerous for us to express them. I want to propose a different take here on emotions. So what if your emotions are a signal? What if they're a signal that you need to communicate something to your environment, to the people in your environment, that you like something, that you don't like something, that you've had a major loss? Emotions are a deep sense of communication about what's true for us. And ironically, they're really less about the people involved and more about us reconnecting with ourselves. So there's something that happens when we give ourselves the time and space to acknowledge how we feel about something. So a way that I've learned to work with emotions through the modality that I offer people, first we want to become aware of it. So if we slow down, what emotion starts to surface? Like, don't go right into the middle of it. Just become aware of the edge of it. Like, is it anger? Is it fear? Is it grief? And then ask yourself, how is it to become aware of it? What I'm really asking there is, what's your relationship to feeling this particular emotion? For some of us, it's easy for us to feel grief, but we want to stay away from anger. For others of us, it's easy to get angry, but we don't want to grieve. And then if you feel comfortable with it, the emotion that's coming up, ask yourself, what does it want to say? I don't like this. I don't want this. I deserve. I've lost. Just seeing if you can get in touch with what it wants to communicate. And it doesn't even have to make any sense. The point is to reconnect with the intention of the emotion. And here I want to really differentiate feeling the emotion from doing something about it. In my experience, when we give ourselves the space to actually let ourselves feel the emotion and let that process move through, then on the other side of it, we can consider if there's anything we want to do. So for example, I might be frustrated with my neighbor because she said something to me I didn't like. If I take the time to sit with that frustration, instead of just reacting to her and telling her to get lost, I might realize that, I simply want her to be respectful of me. And then I can decide, once I've gotten in touch with what I really want, I can decide, okay, is this somebody who has the capacity to hear what I want to say? Or maybe this is a relationship where it's not appropriate for me to speak up or whatever, but I can consider from a more settled place, is it appropriate for me to do something with this or not? And I just want to acknowledge what someone said about feeling anxious. While anxiety itself is more of a signal than an emotion, what we want to get curious about when we feel anxious is, what's the anxious about? Often it's about conflicting impulses, like I want to do this, but I can't let myself. Or there might be emotion underneath the anxious. There might be fear, there might be anger. And if there's fear, we can ask ourselves, okay, what's the worst thing we can imagine happening? Now, with COVID, for many of us, that's already happened. We've lost loved ones. So it's important to acknowledge that. But sometimes when we look at what we're most afraid of, it's not even something that could actually happen. And then by getting explicit about what the fear is about, often it eases a bit just in that. Let's see. And I just want to name, emotions come in waves. So if you're beginning to enter the grieving process about losing someone to COVID, for example, there may be moments where you feel it really intensely, and then it subsides, and then it can come out of nowhere again when you're in the middle of doing something completely unrelated, and then it will settle out again. And that's just how grief works. In my experience, grief is how we reconnect with our hearts. And so really giving the grief process time and space is a way of restoring that 50-50 balance, of really deeply reconnecting with ourselves. I also want to say a couple more things with respect to anger, because for many of us, that's an emotion we don't want to go near. I want to separate anger from violence. For many of us, we became afraid of anger because we grew up in violent environments. Anger is an energy of expressing, I don't like this. Violence is acting out on somebody else. Those two don't have to have anything to do with each other. Just because we feel our anger doesn't mean we're like the violent person we grew up with. When we feel our anger in a responsible, contained way, and we get in touch with what it wants to communicate, we're taking responsibility for that emotion and letting ourselves feel it. When we stuff emotions, we're stuffing our very life force, and then it's more likely that we will act out in a way that's violent. And so when we give it space and really come into relationship with anger and grief and fear and even happiness, for some of us have trouble feeling happy right now, because who am I to feel happy when there's all this suffering going on? Like, that's another piece of this. But as I started, anger does not have to equal violence. I also want to say it's okay to be angry at the virus, for example, at God for bringing the virus, like whatever that is. That doesn't mean you're a bad person if you're suddenly angry about someone who matters to you, or about God when you have a strong relationship with God, or being angry at the virus that is this nebulous thing. That's just saying you don't like it or something about it. That doesn't make you a bad person. My intention here is for all of us to develop the capacity to be with what we like and what we don't like, because inside every person we relate to, there's things we like about them and love about them, and things we don't like. And just because we're angry at someone doesn't mean we don't love them. Just because we're angry at God doesn't mean we don't love God, or whatever spiritual entity that matters to you. So this is just a cute little quote I found on the internet. Why are you crying? I felt like growing, so I watered my soul. And this goes back to what I said a few minutes ago about how grief can really be a reconnection to our hearts. So Lydia, it looks like you're typing some stuff in the chat. Do you want to share that with us more directly?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts have come up. One is air kisses are wonderful. So another way of communicating our expression of love and appreciation with our participants and others. Let's see, and then a comment here about sleep, and how is what you're discussing with us today affect sleep, and do some of these exercises you're talking about help us with that? So I thought that was, I know I have had, I am an excellent sleeper, and I have had disturbed sleep for the last year and a half, really unusual for me.
I really appreciate that question. The way I think about sleep is can I let myself rest down right now? Right? Can I let myself really rest down, or is there something I'm going to have to attend to right now? And so I particularly like the first arriving exercise I did, where hands on joints, and also in particular the vagus nerve exercise for giving my body the message that it's okay to settle. And keep in mind when you do these, like, I've burst into tears doing these exercises. You know, it's like I'll be sitting there going, okay, you know, I want to do a little self-care right now. And the next thing I know, I'm bawling. And I didn't even know that grief was lurking. And so, you know, so by doing this kind of clearing out whatever's going on inside us, it can give us more space to rest down. And if people are carrying, in particular, fear about the pandemic, the virus, what's going to happen to a loved one, what's going to happen to themselves, like uncertainty, fear and uncertainty can definitely interfere with sleep. And these are places, you know, where if you feel like this is an overwhelming problem for you, I really encourage you to get professional help, because again, that loner place, many of us are tuned to believe like, oh, I just have to take care of this all by myself. I shouldn't need help. I don't have time to ask for help. But it's important to remember that when you ask for help, you're increasing your ability to show up for the folks that matter to you, right? You're increasing your capacity to serve the folks that you want to serve. So there's nothing weak about getting help. There's nothing wrong with getting help.
I think that's really important, Susie. And I also, you know, from that quote that you read earlier from one of our program directors in our community, fatigue.
Yeah.
Just fatigue. And then maybe then having sleep disturbances on top of that. We're not fully resting and restoring ourselves. So
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's important to recognize.
Yep. Yep. Everybody's stretched right now. So I want to move to COVID and the elderly, and I just want to name, you all are the experts on this. There's probably many things that I'm not going to say here. So if there's anything in particular that I've left out, I encourage you to throw that in the question box so that we can all benefit from your expertise. The first thing I want to name is that for all of us, our survival strategies diminish as we age. So we use those survival strategies to manage experiences that are too much, too fast, that we can't process. And as we age, they become less effective. It's it's much more likely that we're impacted by stress and threat. It's a lot more difficult for elderly people to reorient to a new reality. I mean, how many of us know elders who don't want to leave a beloved home because they don't want the change, even though they can no longer take care of themselves in the home they're living in. Like this sense of difficulty reorienting is huge. There's, with COVID in particular, there's an increased risk for infection and death. There can be a difficulty in meeting basic needs because and I saw this actually in my community in Ashland, Oregon. We had a local organization that would provide basic, run errands, get meals and stuff for elders, and that all stopped during COVID because people are so afraid of getting the virus. It's important to acknowledge how many of them have been cut off from seeing family and friends in any way. If there's no access to Zoom or they can't do that for some reason, it's been many months of not seeing their loved ones. And so their sense of isolation has been profound. And consequently with that, a sense of helplessness. For many elders, there's a difficulty in understanding what's happening, especially if there's any kind of mental decline. They can't make heads or tails of what's going on. And for many people, it's increased the financial uncertainty that they experience. And all of this can lead to increased reactivity and paranoia, which can be very, very difficult to navigate for them and for everyone serving them. So here's just a few tips for attuned elder care from the perspective of what we've been talking about. I can't emphasize enough that less is more. So for many of us, there can be a rush to get back to normal, but regardless of how old we are, it takes time to process this kind of change and transition. So particularly with elders, it's important to give them time to reorient. If your center has physically changed because you've taken the time to do updates or, change paint colors or rearrange the furniture, all that stuff matters to them. So if you have an elder who had a favorite place in the room and that's now changed, that's going to be, that could be challenging for them because maybe they were looking, forward to something quote normal. If they have the capacity for it, creating some kind of reconnection activity for them, for all of you to do with each other as a way of acknowledging coming back together. And to the degree that it's appropriate, acknowledge what's changed and acknowledge who's missing. And this is a really tender place, but I know that many of you have lost participants to the disease and to other illnesses. And so, rather than this happening slowly over, days and weeks and months, it's all of a sudden you're back together and there's all these people missing. Consider what you can do to create a familiar experience. Maybe it's a game that you all played or an activity that you did every week. Any kind of consistency and schedule. I know all of this is really difficult with all the changing requirements, and considering what thread you can pull through everything regardless of what needs to change. I can't emphasize the importance of curiosity. So if an elder is acting out in some way, being curious with them, what's happening for you right now that you're feeling this way? Tell me more about that. Instead of to the extent you can, and this is really hard, right? Instead of getting hooked by their disorientation, dysregulation, seeing how you can lead with curiosity. One of my beloved teachers always says that curiosity and judgment can't coexist. And so when we lead with curiosity, it helps us stay regulated, and they're going to feel our attunement when we lead with curiosity. We're going to give them the message that, oh, you accept me for who I am right now, even though I'm having a hard time. I just want to acknowledge too that for many of us in the helping professions, we're looked to as people who have all the answers, and that's impossible right now. We don't have all the answers because this is a very much a changing situation. So it's okay to say you don't know when you don't know, especially as things continue to be up in the air. Let's see. So, you know, on a personal level, finding new resources that help you reconnect to yourself as you start to support elders in all this change, what internal resources can you create for yourself so that you create the space to get up, how do I want to say this? There's this way of getting current with ourselves, like, oh, what am I really experiencing? Self-touch, journaling, quiet time. And I'm not talking about taking, you know, a half an hour or an hour out of a very busy day. It can be 5 minutes, like even that can make a difference. How can you begin to create more social contact for yourself as things open up? If that feels good to you, if that feels scary to you, how can you begin to acknowledge, oh, wait a minute, that's, you know, this is all happening a little fast for me. Like the reopening can feel as fast as the closing did. And I mentioned already earlier that many of us would benefit from getting support from helping professionals. Lydia, let's open up that one last poll. And I'm curious with everyone, what's the stress level of the teams that you're working with right now?
And you know, Susie, one thing about teams is that some team members have been together during this whole time. Others have been on furlough, or some have moved on. So there's sort of this reconstituting of a team, and we're so team-based in our centers that in and of itself is both a stressor, can also be exciting.
Yeah.
But I think that we're at this point now of recongregating, whether it's an adult day health or an adult day program, where that is also particularly for the people who've been together during this time, could be a little disorienting, right? Every time you bring someone new into a group. So, okay, we're at about 55%. I'm going to leave this open for just another moment. I like to get to 60% if you haven't voted, if you wouldn't mind.
I want to really appreciate what you just said there, Lydia, about the variety of experiences that the centers are experiencing with teams. One of the things to consider with the information I've provided about survival strategies, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to my next slide, but you can use that frame to start to consider and get to know each other's survival strategies. So, you know, maybe my tendency is to disconnect or be a loner, while somebody else's tendency is to never say no to anything, but to start to know what each person's survival strategy is in your teams and also in your participants. So, because what that does is it helps us have more compassion for ourselves and each other, and it gives us a frame for understanding those more sticky interactions. Like maybe my survival strategies are just clashing with this other person's. So thanks everyone for voting. I again want to acknowledge how high the stress levels are for many of you and for your teams. It's a big deal what we're all facing right now. So caring for your team. I had the great good fortune that during COVID, my work became a refuge because I work with a team of people where I really know that they have my back. And this is really important. Like, performance certainly matters in terms of, are people doing their job well, et cetera. But what matters more from my perspective and what motivates people is knowing that they matter, and knowing and supporting them and feeling connected to themselves and each other. So, making it clear, like who has each other's backs? Like, what does that exactly look like? What are the resources in case somebody's feeling stressed or overwhelmed? Create consistent time to give people space to acknowledge their emotions and needs. And I'm not suggesting you give a space for people to process that. That's where professional help can come in. But if there's simply space for somebody to say, I've just been really scared over the last 24 hours. Like, this is a really big deal for me. And, I read this piece of news, or, I'm scared of the Delta variant, but just being seen in whatever's true for another person can really help the person settle a little bit. Acknowledging the impact of changes and losses. I just talked a little bit about exploring survival strategies together. And most importantly, celebrating what works well. Like, maybe your centers have done some reorganizing, some strategizing, and you're starting to implement new things, and you're seeing what changes are working well. Like, it's important to celebrate that in all of this. And this is all a way of saying that while we don't want to encourage people to act out on each other or take up tons of space in creating this time, we also want to be curious and accepting that everyone's having different experiences of the pandemic. And in this, I just want to name, like, in this caring for your team, you're creating a culture of 50-50 balance, right? When you give your team the space to connect to themselves, you're creating increased resilience in the whole field, right? And the participants are going to feel that. And you're also normalizing it for yourself if you're somebody who who's found that difficult to do as well. Lydia, were you going to jump in and share something?
Was to that point, I've had a comment here about how communication is so essential when people are in various stages of experiencing their emotions in the pandemic and so on. And so just, basic courteous engagement and respect for one another just goes a long way. So I just wanted to underscore what you were just describing to us.
Thank you. So along those lines, years ago at a workshop that I was at, I learned this really sweet little tool that can be great for team connection. And it's called the weather report. And literally what you do is gather together, however that looks for you. You might be standing around, you might be seated together, and literally just simply offer each person a couple of minutes of sharing what their weather is. And that can be, I feel sad today, I feel great today, I feel frustrated today, whatever that is. Just giving them a space to share how they really are. And the key here is there's no feedback, there's no fixing, there's no jumping in, there's no, like everybody's staying in their space, and it increases a sense of safety for the sharing, because they know, the person who's sharing knows, it's like, okay, I get this space, this moment for my real state, my real weather to be heard by these people that I work with. And again, that creates some connection to each other. And again, this doesn't have to take very long, but I've seen teams do this literally, 2, 3, 4 times a week, and had great increase in connection. And I just want to name that healing comes in waves. Sometimes we feel like it's going along fine, like our process is in motion, but then we might have a day where we're more rocky and more kind of not not at our best, and that's just natural. It's just part of the process. So I want to normalize the kind of fits and starts that the recovery process can take. I also just want to provide some additional resources. You're going to get a PDF of this presentation, and all of these underlined things are live links of websites that you can follow. Therapy Aid offers free and low-cost therapy to helping professionals. Winter Spring is an incredible online grief support organization that does online groups and stuff to support people in moving through their experience. SAMHSA has a great disaster distress helpline. For those of you that have the time and the space to become more deeply trauma informed, the NARM online basics training is phenomenal. This is NARM is the modality that I offer people one-on-one. I'm also part of assisting these trainings. If you want to really understand much more deeply the impact of trauma and how it shows up in people and in yourself, this is an incredible training. And then Laura Van Derna Lipsky has an incredible book called Trauma Stewardship that's all about how we can be with other people who are struggling and protect ourselves from secondary trauma. This is a slide from, or a handout from Laura. Lots of things to try here. I'm not going to go through all of them now. And just a last thought from Maya Angelou. I learned a long time ago the wisest thing I can do is be on my own side. I love this quote because, again, it's emphasizing that the importance of the 50-50 balance. It's not at the exclusion of the other person. It's that I'm on my side and I'm on your side. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts, or you are looking for more resources, there's something I didn't share you want to know more about today, you're always welcome to reach out. Big thanks to you all for having me back again. I just really enjoy being here to support the team. I just want to see, we have a few minutes here. If there's any more questions or thoughts, type them in the question box, or Lydia, if there's anything you want to throw in at this point.
Yeah, please do share your thoughts, everybody, in the question box in the last few minutes that we have together. I have a comment here from somebody saying they really appreciated the acknowledgement that we don't have to have all the answers as leaders. I think we know that sort of intuitively, but just to hear that from you and saying it out loud, I think just helps us settle a little bit. And we are in a time of great uncertainty still. We don't have that guidance we've been asking for months. There's just a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And I want to go back to, I think it was Amanda who asked the question about when we can't turn our brains off. You know, part of that can come from a strategy of always pressuring ourselves to have the right answer. So I just want to really underscore what you just underscored and say that for many of us, we respond to threat by pressuring ourselves even more, and we keep piling it on and keep piling it on. So anything we can do to create a little space inside ourselves is going to support that recovery and resilience process that we all want for ourselves.
Yeah, and Jill says, thank you, so helpful and useful. There's much I can use to improve and grow. So thank you for that comment, Jill. And I know when we were preparing for this, Susie, and we thought about asking you, one of the things that the team discussed was the, putting the oxygen mask on first before you help others with theirs. So I think that's my big takeaway today is, and to just be able to slow down a little and take the time to really get in touch with what's happening in the moment. And we'll get through this together. It's been a virtual community, but I don't know how all of you feel out there, but this has really just meant the world to me to feel like we have some connection even beyond our own team and our own home and family. So thank you for everyone to be here. So let's see, I'm going to give just another moment and see if there's other questions or comments that anyone would like to share today. There's a lot to reflect on. Well, thank you, Susie, for all that you do for others, for sharing your knowledge and skills and wisdom with us today. I think there's just a lot here to reflect on and to use. And I appreciated you sharing some tools and some exercises that we can take with us. I love that weather report. So I'd love to hear if any of you use that, how it's going. Lendy says, this has been one of the most difficult years. Thank you for providing awesome tools. Thank you, Lendy. Lendy's one of my other partners with Disability Thrive. So glad you could be here today, Lendy. All right, so let's see, one closing thought here. When we feel uncertain, we can respect that in ourselves as we are tuning into the real world, which does present many challenges right now, and we can trust that we can draw on our strength and rest when we need to. So I think with that, Susie, closing comment from the audience. I want to thank you again for being here, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And everyone, you've got Susie's email. If you do need to communicate with her privately, she would welcome that.
My pleasure, Lydia. It's so good to work with all of you again. I really enjoy this.
Thank you, Susie. So we're going to go ahead and move forward now to our closing slides, everyone. Our upcoming events are on the screen. You don't want to miss Dr. Aronson on July 21. If you have attended any of the California Department of Social Service webinars related to COVID, you will recognize Louise Aronson and her just wonderful, calm and supportive demeanor. She is a geriatrician, a practicing geriatrician in the community at UCSF, and someone I admire greatly. So I hope you can join us for that July 21. The announcement will be going out soon. And I want to also highlight CADS hosting a webinar on the 28th with a very popular presenter to help you support your team communications. Really important, as we've discussed today. So this one will focus more specifically on team communications and support. So hope you can join CADS for that one. Next slide. And as always, I close with a thought for the week, and this one's a little different. I found this quote in an article that I was reading, and it's by the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Amgen. Amgen hosts the races, right, that many of you are familiar with. We have one of their events come through Sacramento, and she says, we have a real mission. We're making a difference. And while the pace that you have to adapt to seems to get faster every day, find comfort in the fact that you are building resilience muscles. 5 years from now, you'll realize just how strong you now are and how valuable this time has been. So it just really struck me, even though this is related to people in a huge corporation who do something completely different than what you do. They support really fast bicycle racing. I just felt like it was speaking to me and maybe to you. And I like the image of building up resilience muscles. And boy, have you all been getting a workout these last 16 months. I think you guys are probably like bodybuilder size right now. So it's just a reminder you're making a huge difference to 37,000 people across the state who need you, and we'll continue to work together to get to the other side of this pandemic experience and show off our resilience muscles when we do get back together. Hopefully later this fall, early winter, that's going to happen. So thanks again for being with us, everyone. Please stay safe, stay strong, flex those resiliency muscles, and we'll see you on July 21 with Dr. Aronson. Thanks again, everyone.